Foreign and Commonwealth Office have some kind of involvement.
If you ask the British government their connection, they'll say absolutely zero. I mean, it seems a bit difficult to believe that. I mean, Britain has significant diplomatic interests, economic interests, also dealing with terrorism in the region. I don't see how they would just let a British company prance into, I mean, this is not a construction or a building deal or a road construction. This is resources off the coast of Somalia where they needed, help getting permits to have armed guards on their seabird seismic vessel. There needed to be quite a bit of British government either permission or turning a blind eye, I guess, to the operation in order for this to proceed.
Global Witness says it has seen a letter from Michael Howard to British government officials which suggests Howard accepted the job at Sommer with the encouragement of the FCO, the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Going back to campaigner Pace, he says the corruption allegations and investigation should mean that Sommer should respect the moratorium called for by the UN.
They should not be moving on to the next stage, which was doing a licensing round and handing out licenses to drill in these oil blocks, and that certainly shouldn't happen until these allegations are cleared up. Instead, that moratorium should be followed, and the other matters that need to be resolved in order to make sure that Somalia's natural resources don't contribute to conflict and corruption, but instead are managed properly and transparently, need to be put in place before anything else is done.
The Serious Fraud Office is pursuing its investigation, while Sommer says it expects this matter to be resolved in the near future.
The new Suez Canal channel was inaugurated and celebrated yesterday in Egypt. In a party where the French President François Int was named as the guest of honor, the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah declared that the project had made history. The Egyptian government has previously described it as a gift from Egypt to the rest of the world. But what does it mean to the Egyptian people who funded it? From Cairo, correspondent Ruth Michelson sent this report.
While the new Suez Canal Channel was being inaugurated in Ismailia, Cairo is still in the mood for a party. A crowd of around 300 people was in Tahrir Square by mid-afternoon Thursday, waving flags and showing their support for the army, the government, and the new project. Fatima Mahmoud Suleiman said she was in Tahrir to celebrate the achievements of the Suez Canal, and one man in particular, President Sisi, who she called her beloved as she kissed his picture. The new channel is a 35-kilometer-long parallel channel that the Egyptian government says will increase traffic and revenue through the canal. They say this will drive up profits from the canal over 12 billion euros every year by 2023. The project was funded with around 7.7 billion euros in public money, purchased via investment certificates. The man was also in Tahrir on Thursday. He bought around 115 euros worth of investment certificates for his young son. I asked him whether he expects to see a return on his investment.
If this project doesn't get all the profits people want, I don't care. What I care about is that I participated and contributed to this great project. So I don't care about the profits. If it fails, at least I'll get my £1,000.
While the Egyptian government's promises have been big, it's not clear what will happen if they don't meet them. Economists who have looked at the canal say it's unlikely that profits should meet the figures proposed by the government. It would require a huge growth in global trade, especially oil exports. Earlier this week, a report by the financial analyst group Capital Economics said that the Egyptian government's figures are based on implausibly optimistic figures of world trade. But not everyone in Tahrir Square on Thursday felt that way. Suad Mohammed was in the square with her two young sons, and she said she bought 115 euros of certificates to each of them.
I came to the square today to share my happiness with the rest of the world. But the world lies and claims that this is not a real project and that it would fail. So I want to be here to prove to everyone that it is a real successful project. All support to the Egyptian army and to Sisi.
I asked if she had anything else to add. She replied with the phrase of the day, "Long live Egypt." The celebrations continued long into the evening as people came out to rejoice in a Cairo lit up for the festivities. The Suez Canal has been a powerful source of Egyptian nationalism for Egyptians since it was nationalised by former President Nasser in 1956. The Egyptian government drew on this nationalist feeling to fund the new Suez Canal project. But what remains to be seen is whether the people will see a return on their investment. Bruce Michelson, RFI.
France has agreed to compensate Russia for failing to deliver 2 Mistral warships ordered by Moscow. The diplomatic and commercial row over the ships began in November when Paris put the €1.2 billion deal on hold, in line with Western sanctions on Russia over its annexation of Crimea and the Kremlin's backing of rebels in Ukraine. The French presidency said in a statement that Russia would be fully the 2 helicopter carriers, which France will keep. RFI's Nancy Fleming has more.
In a phone conversation between Russian President Vladimir Putin and French President François Hollande, the two took a so-called joint decision to annul the original contract. The French government hasn't released exactly how much financial compensation they're giving to Russia. Initially, France seemed reluctant to cancel the deal, but in June last year, the US President Barack Obama urged Paris to press the pause button, which they duly did. But Gustav Gressel, a fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations, thinks Russia has played a good hand, saying they were actually more interested in learning the processes of European shipbuilding, which they've now done, and didn't actually have much use for these ships.
To be frank, Russia has not much use for this kind of military vessels. The thing why Russia wanted to have the Mistral was the fact that its boat building techniques in terms of its shipyard procedures and management processes were terribly outdated. Russia has built its last big warships by the end of Cold War, and they were all built very traditionally in the boatyard or in the dry dock. This is very costly. If you look how the French build the Mistral, you don't have to build very extensive infrastructure. And the Russians, they wanted to see how the Europeans do that and want to participate in one of these projects. And the Mistral class was the biggest kind of warship where the Russians were allowed to participate in a construction program. And that's why they jumped in.
Putin has also downplayed the importance of these boats, but determining the level of financial compensation has reportedly been the main sticking point of negotiations, causing the saga to run unresolved for so long. The French presidency said that Russia would be fully reimbursed for the 2 helicopter carriers which France will now keep, but Moscow wanted around €1.2 billion in compensation on top of that, arguing that training costs for the crews and building port infrastructure should be reimbursed, a far cry from the €785 million Paris had proposed to pay back. But Gustav Gressel believes Putin's aim was to exploit Hollande's weak political situation domestically.
Russia got what it wanted. It got insight into the processes of building these vessels. So now it was more a Russian technique, yes, to get money back, to exploit also the domestic troubles was subjected to because of the failed contract and the possibility of people getting laid off. So it was more a political game, but it is not the biggest loss for Russia not to receive the ships.
Ted Giles of the Russia-Eurasia program at think tank Chatham House thinks Europe's refusal to sell military equipment to Russia is now having a direct impact on their attempts to modernize the military.
Russia is partway through an incredibly expensive program of upgrading its military, which includes bringing new high-tech weapons systems into operation. Now, a key part of that was relying on foreign imports of systems to make them work. These will be hit by the sanctions. It wasn't a declared objective of the EU sanctions, but it is a secondary effect, drawing the teeth from Russia's military and defense modernization and making sure that they can't push ahead with their plans to improve the capabilities of their military quite as fast as they wanted to. Now, one classic example that's quite high profile is the French imaging systems, which are supplied for Russia's most advanced generation of tanks, some of which have already been captured and destroyed in Ukraine. Without the supplies of those, Russia has to look elsewhere for where it is going to find these sophisticated systems for improving the capability of its armored vehicles.
The French government are already in talks with several other unnamed countries that have expressed an interest in buying these warships, so it looks like they'll soon be getting at least some of that money back into state coffers in the near future.
That report from Nancy Fleming. The French government will soon activate parts of a law intended to boost economic growth. The law, known as the Loi Macron, after the economy minister, Emmanuel Macron, who conceived it, is a package of economic reforms with 308 different articles that aim to liberalize sections of France's economy. After marathon negotiations in Parliament, most, but not all, have now been approved by France's Constitutional Court. RFI's Sarah Alsas has more.
The Council rejected 5 of the law's 308 measures. The most important is one that reforms the Prud'homme, the court that oversees labor disputes. The measure would limit the amount of severance an employee can receive if they find they've been unjustly treated by their employers. In the law, the limit would be based not only on the length of time the employees work, but also the size of the company. And the Constitutional Court ruled that the size has nothing to do with the employee, so threw out that part. Another article that was rejected, and you see here the variety of articles there are in this law, is one that would ease advertising allowed for alcoholic beverages. The court says the restrictions need to stay. Prime Minister Manuel Valls said that the measures approved will come into effect in the next few months. Some will come into effect immediately, like an article that allows shops in certain tourist zones, notably the Champs-Élysées in Paris, to open every Sunday of the year, or another one that opens the long-distance bus sector up to competition. The Loi Macron is seen as crucial in Brussels, where the EU has urged France to reform in order to bring down its budget deficit, which is far above European limits.
You're listening to Paris Live AM. We're joined now in the studio by Bavandjay Kadilkar, who's been looking at the French newspapers. What have you found?
Well, Brian, today's Le Monde leads with the headline, France compensates Russia for Mistral warships. The report says that French President François Hollande and Russian President Vladimir Putin reached an agreement on Wednesday after the cancellation of the sale of 2 Mistral warships to Russia. In a statement, the Elysee said that Russia would be repaid the amount France had received in advance. The contract was valued at 1.2 billion euros. The exact amount of the reimbursement will be communicated to the parliament. Russia's role in the Ukrainian conflict had caused the collapse of the sale. Le Monde also carries a story on the opening of the Suez Canal on its front page under the headline, Rafale is the superstar of the canal. The report states that 3 French-made Rafale aircraft flying over the Suez Canal on Thursday during the inauguration of the Suez Canal expansion. Among the dignitaries present at the opening was French President François Hollande, who was the guest of honor. The paper mentions that the conclusion of the sale of 24 Rafale jets to Egypt for 5.2 billion euros ended the curse that seemed to have surrounded the plane, which was shunned by other countries earlier. It was considered too expensive and too sophisticated. But since the agreement with Egypt